I love.
And looks like you got one attendee to get happening. I might give yourself, hey, good morning, folks. I'll turn this over to Matt. We're going to start this. We're going to give everybody about 2 minutes to get started, but turn this over to Matt. Matt, we got 4 on, and maybe just just 1 more minute.
Good deal. Good morning, folks. Happy you could all make it. Honored you all want to spend 30 minutes of your Thursday hearing me rant. I checked the invite list before this started, and then I know most of you, so I know most of you are used to hearing me rant. Maybe that's why you're okay with it. Either way, looking forward to it. We'll do another 30 seconds here, and then we'll get rocking and rolling. I'll share my screen in the meantime. Let's see here. Let's do this actually. Okay, let's start with the deck. That way I'm not making any sort of, how can I see attendees? I can't. Okay. For those of you who don't know, this is my first time doing a webinar. Sid's hosted webinars a bunch of times. You should come to all of them. This is my first time actually presenting at one. It's a little bit unusual, but the good news is my lifetime of talking to myself is gonna pay off here. So let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about data collection. There we go. Let me move this out of the way. Data collection. And what you can do with data that your process is already generating. This is specifically going to be geared towards small to mid-sized food manufacturers. We've got some folks who might be joining who signed up that I don't know if they necessarily fall in this bracket, which is okay. We'll talk about some things that you can do if you're a little bit above the ideal range of this presentation. And the reason that I think this is super relevant now is in the last 5 years, that I've been in the industry, I think have been hugely important in developing this type of technology to be relevant to food manufacturers. It's been relevant to manufacturers and other sectors for a long time, but there are a few key things that have made this viable for food manufacturers of all sizes. We're going to talk a little bit about them. Just to go into a little bit of organization, how this is going to work. We'll talk a bit about some abstract stuff like what is data, those existential questions, and then talk a little bit about what problems it solves, and then spend most of the time discussing tools that I know and are familiar with and enjoy for collecting and or analyzing said data. That will be like the majority of this. I want you to come away with this with some tools you can use with or without my help to actually start or continue collecting data and begin to use it to make your process better. So let's dive into slide 1. I guess I'll start a slideshow instead of letting you guys see everything. Disclaimer. This is some of the stuff we're not going to talk about too much because of the size focus of this presentation, right? Like I said before, the idea of using the data that an industrial process generates to gather insights is not new. It's been used in tons of other manufacturing sectors for 30 years. It's relatively new for certain sizes of food businesses. That's what we're talking about today. Traditionally, there's a pretty wide range of tools that are used. We're not going to talk too much about these. Like I said before, if you're one of our guests who are maybe from a company who already has something like an enterprise resource planning service or uses a traditional MES, you're probably more of a fit for these. Not that you can't use any of the tools we're going to talk about today for maybe more localized initiatives, but these are going to be relevant to you, but we're not talking about them too much today. These traditional tools that are for traditionally large businesses are going to be really highly customized. They're going to be specifically built for specific use cases within specific production applications. All that to say that more specification means better results, especially initially. These are all going to rely on exceedingly rapid data collection. What we're going to talk about later on is that portion has become possible for food and beverage manufacturers now, which is why larger food and beverage manufacturers can use these traditional tools, because they can have data acquisition systems that sample at 2 points a second or something like that. where that used to not be possible for a long time. But the main reason we're not talking about this super in depth is the scale, right? These solutions come with really high integration costs. You're talking about a custom engineered software solution, and it's going to come with a large annual license. I'm about 18 months into one of these right now with a really large meat processor, and we're butting up against $500,000 in initial cost and initial investment. But as we'll see here, it can lead to really, really huge paybacks. So these are two of the more boutique, custom, artificial intelligence, and machine learning solutions providers that I like to work with. If you're not familiar with that nomenclature, you've probably heard the word AI, whether it's for work or at a movie. I think machine learning is much more relevant because it describes what's going on a lot better. But think of not just automating the collection of data or the operation of the execution of operations, right? Think, industrial automation, automated equipment, robotics, but the automation of analysis of data and insight gathering of data. We'll just scroll through the browser's website really quick. I put in here some notes about said project and what we're looking for what our calculations is telling us about returns. This is a pretty important pilot project for us in this space using this type of AI ML algorithm. And while it might not seem like a 3% reduction in overall batch time and a 1% reduction in scrap rate, which we're actually a little over right now, both those goals, if things hold, doesn't seem like a lot, except it's annually $3.6 million in additional production capacity, i.e. additional revenue. If you're selling every pound of product you're making, every additional production hour you're running or pound per minute increase is money in your pocket. And this is an immediate money in this client's pocket, and will be moving forward. Like I said, it comes with a pretty steep price tag, but for companies that are looking for these types of where 3% improvement in revenue is a couple $1 million, this is the kind of solution you're going to want to look at. Let's just really quick. Hold on here. Oh, there we go. Really quick, scroll through the site. Let's look at this just to describe a bit how this works. Oops, I want to look at this one first. So you'll see what I mean about custom and when you look at what these actually look like. So a couple things about this. Just like a lot of other tools we're going to look at, whether they're for large small businesses, it's going to be SaaS based, right? So you're going to pay annual license to use them. They're going to be cloud based, which is good. That means you're going to be able to access them from any device via a web client. It'll work really great on a PC. It'll work really great on a mobile. It doesn't matter if you're running, Mac OS or Windows. These things will work quickly, and it decentralizes your data, which is nice too, so that you don't have to worry about like storage costs of however many terabytes of data you're generating per day. Here's an example of some of the really valuable things that these boutique solutions can do, and that is unifying data sources, right? If you're a production setup and you have flow meters on 5 different lines, and you have a vision system that's double checking barcodes or that is grading produce, and then you also have a palletizing robot, and you want to know how many cycles that's doing a minute, and you are getting information on rotational speed of different axes. That's a lot of things, and they probably operate within different data pools, and they probably don't share similar programming languages. All of that can be remedied by a solution like this and establish what they like to call, this isn't necessarily a Delta Bravo thing, a single source of truth, which is what makes some of these more complicated ML algorithms work. And then you can end up with these custom built dashboards that provide you insights you wouldn't even be able to see, because these ML algorithms can create, right, process control charts that use 200 different variables, right? Ones you would never think to check, and find correlations you might never think will be there. A really good example of this, one reason we like to work with Delta Bravo is they have a lot of experience in biological product manufacturing, whether that's food and bev, which obviously we care about, or how I found about them, specialty agriculture. They like to talk a lot about their work with the largest indoor mushroom growing company in the world. And what they were able to do with this mushroom grower is standardize their growth process by automating the development of recipes for substrate, right? You grow mushrooms in a collection of different dirt-like materials, and those dirt-like that material is created via a recipe of ingredients, and that recipe development is key to yield, right? And by examining variables like the previous year's weather or the fan speed in their HVAC system, or the growth rates of various mushrooms they use, they were able to automate out that recipe development. And once they have a recipe developed, track growth rate over time and tell you in advance if something is catastrophically wrong with your batch, you need to kill it now instead of waiting, however many weeks it takes to actually finish a growth round of mushrooms to know, did you get a good yield or did you not? So those are the sort of really, really cool, interesting things you can get out of solutions like these. I know we spent 5 minutes on it, but that's all we're going to spend on it. If you have other questions about this kind of thing, or you're a company who fits this size profile and find this really relevant, please talk to me. Like I said, this is a really revolutionary thing. SIP just put resources into piloting this in other places. We'd love to talk about it with you. I can share a lot more information, but it's not really the scope of the presentation. So we're going to stop that there. Let's go back to my deck. What can you all see? Here we go. Soothsayer Analytics is another system that does this. We don't need to dive super into that one either. They're locally based in Columbus, and they don't only do manufacturing, but also supply chain, point of sales. If you're doing your own e-commerce business, it can be really good to integrate some of that information into your manufacturing, data collection and analysis. So something to consider. Once again, that's all we're covering there. So let's step back and talk about why this is important, because numbers by themselves are not inherently valuable. They matter in terms of how decisions are made, right? And all decisions, whether it's what you can pull off in terms of casual dress at the office, or actually important decisions like things about your process, line speed, schedules, process parameters. All of those decisions are based off of assumptions, right? Assumptions like, historically, there's a 100% chance that no one will comment on my untucked shirt at the office, so I'll go ahead and pull it off, right? Or, like I said, important things. Some things to consider about these decisions and how important they are things like how often are these decisions made, right? If you're making decisions on process parameters constantly, then there's a lot of room for those decisions, be they correct or incorrect, to impact your bottom line. So if you make an important decision about scheduling once a year, well, the potential return on understanding that decision better isn't super high. But if you're consistently adjusting, temperature or flow rate in your operation, then nailing that decision-making operation can bring some really valuable money back to you. What's the basis of these decisions, right? This is what I talked about earlier. Every decision we all make is based off of assumptions. Are those assumptions valid? What's the basis of those assumptions? Is it because someone's seen it happen before? Is it someone's internal, like my office wear analogy, your own internal observations? And then who is making these decisions? This kind of leads to the next point. I think you can all see where I'm going with this. Whether that person is qualified to make those decisions, whether that person is exposed to the proper amount of information to make an informed decision, that person's longevity to be able to continue to make decisions. All those things matter because all these things feed into kind of the problem we're trying to solve, which is tribal knowledge. All right, and I imagine most of you have heard about tribal knowledge. Oh my gosh, shift stat. I'm sorry, you guys can only see my deck. Let me tell my person on Zoom. I will send out the link to Delta Bravo after this. You guys can look over their site. It's very cool. Thanks for the heads up. So tribal knowledge, some of you have probably heard about it. Actually, all of you have heard about it because it was in the invite to this event that I'm sure you all read thoroughly. So you are well aware of what this is. But to sum up, is the phenomenon where important information is stored in the minds of a small number of individuals. Why is this a problem? Well, who are these people, right? It could be, a lot of times we think of tribal knowledge being stuck in the head of Terry who's been there 50 years, but it could also be in your head, right? That's right. It could be in your head, Bill, director of operations. Stop talking to you. I know what you're thinking. You've got another 30 years before you retire, right? It doesn't matter that you make all the important decisions and you know how things work. You'll be there forever. Well, you can't be there forever, right? Eventually you're going to retire. Eventually you might change positions, or you also can't be there all the time. What if an important decision needs to be made when you're not around? You can't spend all of your time at the plant. Think about your family, Bill, okay? This is why this kind of stuff is important, because no matter whose head this information is in, if it's not decentralized, it's going to create issues around who is aware of it and who is using it to make decisions. And it's a huge threat to long-term growth, like we're talking about, not just Bill's family, but also, like I said, how do you replace individuals? How do you ensure, this is really important, how do you know you got everything out of Terry's head before he retired, right? He said he told you everything, but does he even know what he knows? Does he even know that he's been collecting data 50 years internally and knows that, oh, when this happens, we need to do this because I saw it in 1972. He might not even remember to tell you that. That's why these kind of things are important. And like I said, what we're talking about today presents a solution to this problem. Let's continue. Maybe. There we go. So, data collection. I think this is kind of the more important half of this presentation if we're talking about collection and analysis, only because data analysis generally is not new. And once we have the information off of our food production system, then analyzing it is not as groundbreaking as collecting it. So this is the more important of the two halves, is collecting data. And one of the reasons, like I said, that I think there's been such an improvement in this industry in the last 5 years, maybe a little longer than that, is improvement in sensor tech, especially for biological products. It's substantially harder to rapidly measure inline important characteristics of a food product than it is like a machined part necessarily, or some other widget that somebody makes, right? It's much easier to check weigh a piece of metal than it is to gather moisture content information off of a snack food, right? Inline rapidly, or at least it used to be. Nowadays it's not. It's important that one thing I mentioned earlier, and I'll mention here again too, is it's really important to really use good data to have not necessarily high sampling rates, so not necessarily a ton of data points per hour, but from the beginning of the data collection process to the end of it, that process is rapid, right? Let's just kind of stick on to moisture since that's worked so well so far. Still to this day in lab settings and 20 years ago in all settings, moisture content was measured on a dry basis, right? So a moisture meter would be a scale with a heating element, and you would just heat a sample for an hour until the weight stopped changing a certain amount to signify that you had removed all the moisture, and then the difference between beginning weight, initial weight was moisture content, right? That's accurate, but it's not rapid, because if you start, you're lucky to get 3 data points a day if you are moving in that direction, and it's not going to be representative of what is actually going on in your process. But things like NMR for moisture content creates a new paradigm of how to even measure this kind of stuff that happens rapidly, right? And even though I'll skip ahead a little bit. I was thinking about this morning. Pros and cons of automatic versus manual data collection tools. I don't actually like how I said that, because I'm not saying it's like a flow meter versus an abacus in terms of automatic and manual, more inline versus semi-automatic data collection. And you can think of an NMR that exists outside of a production line where you're pulling a sample every 5 minutes and quickly checking under an NMR, and 10 seconds later you have a number. And that number is either manually recorded into some database or even could be automatically sent to some data lake. That would be semi-automatic, whereas the more traditional, we like to use flow meters, right? A flow meter would be inline, right? Both of them are rapid and accurate. That's the necessary pieces of any sort of sensor that's going to be in a system like this, but they're not necessarily both inline. And that's another scenario where it's really interesting to illustrate how far technology has come as flow meters. Late last year, we did some design work for a meat processing client on a Coriolis meter, which is super cool because of how it uses vibration to measure flow rate in materials that have variable densities, normally due to entrapped air. That's super hard in more traditional approaches. The flow rate measurement And those used to be horribly impractical, not just from a cost standpoint, but from a weight standpoint. They were really tough to actually put into any, unless you designed a whole line around them. They were really tough to actually integrate. And while they're still as heavy as a semi-truck, they are less heavy and less expensive and substantially easier to integrate. When you obviously you can see a return, they're still super expensive. But that's a really good example of the general movement of sensor technology, kind of like TVs, in terms of better performance and less cost over time, especially for biological products. And then the third point here, I just want to preface the stuff we're going to talk about with, if you don't have some of these sensors or various data collection systems in place, it doesn't have to be a sensor, guys, or whatever. It could be a person counting things. It can take some time, if not as much money, right? Some of these instruments aren't going to, be a six-figure investment necessarily, but being really thoughtful about how you collect this data and where you put data collection methods is going to take some thought and maybe some trial and error even. So just know that before you go in. And we'll talk about some tips in terms of like integrating a system like this down the road. What can make that process easier, but just it's going to be a bit of a process. Just don't want anybody to have the wrong idea of what is feasible in a small amount of time. Okay, let's talk about tools. Let's say we're going to collect data manually, i.e. semi-automatically. It's not going to automatically send information to whatever data lake we're going to use, that thing will be analyzed. And I start here because this is more relevant for small and mid-sized food businesses because of the lower initial investment. There are some automatic things we'll talk about, but I wanted to start here. First thing you can do is use a paper form, which seems ridiculous, but it's something. And I don't only bring this up because if you're not using a paper form, it's maybe an easy way to start because it takes less training from your operators. You have a really manual, heavy process operation. It takes less buy-in, but also because in our world, if there's QA people on this call, there's already a lot of paper forms floating around your building. Maybe there's really important things on those that you could use if you had them all. So paper forms are really not ideal for a lot of reasons, but they're better than nothing and they probably already exist. The next thing I want to talk about is Google Sheets, or more broadly, any of the various flavors of shared use spreadsheet software. I like Google Sheets because SIF uses Google Office Suite, so it's really easy to integrate and all that other stuff. I think the shared use side of Google Sheets is well done compared to something like Microsoft SharePoint, where you're actually using an Excel file. But your mileage may vary on that. The idea of free, can't overstress that enough, free spreadsheet software that's really powerful that anybody can access and see is really, really cool, because you can build Google Sheets on an iPad for pretty much $0. I mean, how much the iPad costs, and start taking those paper forms that you were doing, the same setup that your operator was doing with a paper form, can now go into a Google Sheet, which makes that data much easier to do things with. So that tiny little step up from a paper form to a Google Sheet or something similar is really powerful, because that actually unlocks the ability to use those numbers for interesting things. So those are both like the really entry-level methods of starting to collect data manually or outside of your process. Let's talk about two tools that I think make this process substantially easier. They're kind of steps up from Google Sheets. Now, I'm assuming none of you can see this, so I'm gonna start over. Cool. So the next two tools we're gonna talk about are, I said earlier that we're not gonna talk about MESs, and that was kind of a lie. We're kind of gonna talk about MESs, but only really, really basic bare bones entry-level MESs that are designed for smaller setups. And both these do very similar things. If you saw the slide, it's going to be Next Plus. We're looking at right now, and Tulip. They just do them a little differently. I like to compare them, honestly, to I think there's somebody else called it, Herbie says before, to iPhone and Android. And right now we're looking at iPhone first. Next Plus and Tulip, as we'll see, are both small-scale MESs that are designed primarily to present work instructions to operators. Right, it's an opportunity for you to build custom applications that your operators interact with through some type of hardware, PC, tablet, mobile, to present to them important information. Scroll down here, you can see what I'm talking about. I think it's here. Yeah, here we go. Here's an example. That present important information, right? Step 3 of your process of your whatever product you make has instructions and notes and media via pictures or videos. And the very interesting thing about this versus a traditional paper SOP is that you can track even the completion of steps. So if you look at something like this, where you have, connect a wire, right? Even though it seems like we're not collecting any data out of that, we know after an operator presses next on that piece of their work instruction that this person completed this step at this time, right? And the interesting comes in when you start to add in the ability to have your operators input data. This kind of thing, right? You have the opportunity to ask your operator to input something like a qualitative visual check, something like a analytical thing they might do. Think a basic pH meter, or like I said, NMR, or a check weigher. Like you can have them weigh something and insert that information directly into your data lake, which you can then use. So it's kind of like Google Sheets. Like I said, you have somebody just manually inputting data they generated outside of the process, but it's a little more intuitive because it's relevant to the portion of the process they're actually working on, and it saves all that back end mumbo jumbo for you and your management team instead of making your operators interact with it on a daily basis. And then we'll skip ahead a little bit. Both these systems, Tulip and Next Plus, also have, well, you can see here, this is talking about multi-language, but also have the ability, they have onboard data analysis systems too, right? So you can create your own dashboards that can actually show you the information you're generating in the ways you want to be shown it. All of this is very easy to use, something that you'll see Tulip talk about substantially. I don't know if Next Plus talks about it too much, is the no-code nature of this application development. So you are creating your own applications. This is not a service this is not a model where you have an entire team of techs with either of these companies at your disposal, but you have your own ability to create your own systems, and it's very intuitive. So you are dragging and dropping, like you see in this little video. I hope you see it. All the things that you're doing are easy to do. Even if you're adding in your own logic, there's a wizard for that. If then or statements, it's easy to integrate on your own, and it can help you take that low-hanging fruit that you think might be available. Let me switch back over to Tulip just so you can see a little bit of the differences. I don't see anything in the chat, which means I'm assuming you all saw that. So that's good. Let me pull this up. And the Tulip, which is more of the Android approach. Next Plus has if you all haven't heard that analogy before, Android OS, right, is an open book. They'll let you do whatever you want in Android OS. You can install your own applications, you can create your own applications, do whatever you want. But there's not very much guidance, and it's sometimes easy to get overwhelmed. My oldest brother is a big time web developer, and he lives on Android because he's very familiar with this world and he knows how to optimize the value of that system. iPhone, iOS is different. Apple says, here is the best way to do it based on what we like, use it. And me, and I'm assuming a lot of you, also like it. So is this someone telling me they can't see something? Oh, I see. Okay, so if you guys didn't know, quick heads up. Thank you, Todd, on marketing team, for letting me know this. Only panels can use chat. So if you guys have any questions or anything as we go, we'll obviously do questions at the end. There is a Q&A function, and you can actually raise your hand. There's a raise hand button somewhere, and we can do some questions as we go. So you don't have to hold them to the end. We're going to talk about it at the end. Bottom, I'm sorry, it's top for me. But if you have them, feel free to go ahead and shout them out metaphorically. So in that way, Next Plus and Tulip are similar, where Tulip is more of the Android approach, where there's not as much structure, but if you have a team that's maybe familiar with coding, or this is also a no-code software, a team that's familiar with app development, you can do maybe a little bit more. So here is an example too of here you'll see another example of work instructions. It looks kind of similar to X+, right? Because they do similar things. And you can see here too that on this screen, not only is it telling you your operator what to do, providing some notes, giving you a little bit of media support. You have a spec here, a bill of materials, parts list. That sounds like, not food manufacturing, but it is relevant. And then the ability to report a defect, which is a type of information gathering, or anything else you might want to do. I see we have a Q&A. Ahmad, excellent question. I'm gonna hit answer live. I don't know what that does. I'm gonna answer this question live. So both of these are around $4,000 to $5,000 annually. So that's the license for both of these. They're in the same ballpark price-wise. Your exact price is going to depend on your application. If you would like to speak with either of these folks, or are interested in onboarding, we're actually beta testing this with somebody right. Not this one. I'm sorry. We're beta testing Next Plus right now. So we have Steve does some experience in integrating this into a food manufacturing environment. Is there another question? No, that was all of them. The question for anyone who didn't know is what's the cost of these platforms. Hopefully that was apparent. Okay, so let's go back to the deck. That's not right. There we go. Okay. That's some of my favorite manual data collection tools. Automatic stuff. Some things we're not going to talk about up top. SQL servers. If any of you aren't familiar with SQL servers, think of them like your own private cloud, right? Your own private Google Drive or Microsoft OneNote. I don't know what they call them. They can get pretty pricey for a lot of data, for a lot of storage capacity and industrial operations need storage capacity. This is another situation where if you have one of these already, if you're at a company who you have heard the word SQL before, you're probably going to want to talk about our initial two solution providers up top. They're going to provide you like the most value for the data that you already have if you have a SQL server to support it. But the next one is a tool that a lot of people think of, a lot of large manufacturers use, but I think can be relevant to small folks, and that's Ignition, which is a SCADA architecture. If you haven't heard that word before, think of it as a software designed to interact with hardware, right? It's designed for IoT applications and specifically for PLC compatibility. Let me just show you guys this one too as we go. Hold on, folks. Where was I? I'm sorry. Here we are. There we are. Okay, I got a million windows open. So, sorry. Let me. One thing I want to show you here really quick is look at some of these. An example of what SCADA is, right? So think of more real-time visualization of important perimeters and control of them, right? It can kind of be like one combined HMI. If you guys are familiar with the HMIs on your various modern automatic equipment, think of SCADA as one big HMI where all of these, all this information that comes off of your machine that would normally be presented to you visually is going to be tracked, which obviously allows you to do some relation things with it. So combined control and analysis software. I don't know what SCADA actually means, but maybe it's that. One thing I wanted to show you was they brag a lot about some new, I must not be in this tab, about food companies. They have Sierra Nevada Brewing and Chobani Yogurt on here specifically, which once again talks to the relevancy of this for food manufacturing right now. This is another system that, because you can see it's pretty robust, right? Here's how it works. It's pretty robust in what it can do and what it allows you to do. It is a one-time fee. This isn't a SaaS service, which is super rare these days. But to do control and analysis, it's going to be somewhere in like the 20,000 ballpark initially to get started. And it's going to take some people on your team who have some expertise in this. But if you have an internal IT team, they're probably familiar with SCADA architecture, and you might already have an Ignition ignition license. So this is really powerful because of its ability to combine control and visualization. Also available on any OS because it runs through the web. So it's a little bit more expensive than some of the other things we're talking about, but it's really powerful. And it's not, I don't think it's so obscenely expensive that it's not feasible for almost any manufacturer. One thing it relies on though is you having hardware that supports it, right? We talked before about Nextpulse and Tulip that you don't really need to have any specific type of hardware or any type of production equipment. One thing we'll talk about in a second a lot further is the food and beverage industry is full of legacy manufacturing equipment. There's stuff in all of your plants that I've seen, trust me, that's 50 years old and was not set up for any of this. We're gonna talk about a way to retrofit that, but if it would be really hard or cost prohibitive to retrofit that, ignition wouldn't really be a good fit because you're not gonna have the information going out in real time, in line that you would need. These rely on inline sensors, not something that's semi-automatic, to go back to that analogy previously. Here we go. And then the last thing we'll look at here, we don't need to look at Pigeon, but we'll look at Mingo because it is similar to ignition, and that is a SCADA system where it's designed to control and analyze your information. I wish there was a better way to, new share. There is a better way to do that. That's awesome. But it comes with the ability to, so you can see similar here, you're importing information from various process equipment, you're exporting that to a dashboard, and you're controlling all of this process equipment from said dashboard, right? And this allows you to do real-time insights. We'll talk a little bit about KPIs versus trend data, keep KPIs being key performance indicators, and the benefit of that being real-time understanding of your process. And this allows you to do that. I'm sorry, hold on here. Oh, screen sharing is paused. I'm sorry, hold on, folks. I pressed the wrong button. There we go. There we go. We're back. One thing I want to talk about here. Here we go. This is important. The reason I got connected to Mingo in the first place through the fantastic Manufacturing Central Partnership Network is because I was stumped by this issue of legacy equipment being unable to export OEE data. A bit of a story, if you'll humor me here. This fall, I was up taking a look at a new line, a confectionery line being made for a client who's building a facility. And it was ready to go. We were doing a FAT, and it had a wonderful HMI control system built in. It was a chocolate molding line. If you guys aren't familiar with that, it's exactly what it sounds like. But there's a bunch of different really important parameters you might want to adjust, be it obviously heating element texture. There was a built-in cooling tunnel. You can control airflow and set point temperature in there. You can control the rate of mold going through that cooling tunnel. You can control how close the mold got to the fill head. You can control how the speed in which it descended back as it was filled to control fill height. You can control inclusion density, a ton of things, probably 100 variables you can control. I was really impressed. And I asked the engineer there, this is really, really cool. How can we get out what our parameters were set at for X production run? That would be really cool to know what our parameters were and to see them historically. And he gave me a puzzled look and said, well, we could build that in, yeah, but why would you want to do that? And I say that not to rag on this manufacturer, but more to point out that there's a culture in food and bev of limited equipment connectivity. And Mingo presents an opportunity to remedy that. Now, this is a little bit more of a turnkey approach compared to ignition, where they're going to set up a lot of stuff for you. But that can be really valuable if you need some of your legacy equipment modernized, so to speak. So I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with Mingo. I've talked to them before. They're wonderful. But I don't know super well how their process works. But I think it's really interesting for food and beverage manufacturers because, like I said, of the just environment around equipment that we have in our industry. Fantastic. Let's then go back to the deck. We'll talk about Pigeon. The thing we'll talk about there is this is a kind of a startup, another connection I was able to make through the MP network. This is a very bare bones service. I think this might be really interesting to a lot of you because of all it does is track PLC outputs and send out automatic alarms via SMS or email, which seems really basic. And it is really basic. It also costs really basic. It's $50 a month. It's like a Netflix subscription, only it allows you to monitor your process in real time, be alarmed if anything goes wrong. This was actually developed out of another confectionery application. That's how this business is developed for monitoring melter and enrober temperature. For those of you who don't work in confectionery, I'm sure you can imagine that keeping chocolate at the correct temperature and fluid is super important to get things go catastrophically wrong. That doesn't happen. So a bright engineer at said confectioner created a system that would take PLC inputs and notify plant management if something were going wrong, so that if they lost temperature in the middle of the night, they wouldn't be surprised the next morning. This has a lot of really interesting applications in terms of like really important things you don't want to go wrong. If any of you folks have like freezer or cold storage on site, similarly, temperature, right? Those boxes have PLC that allows you to set the temperature point, and Pigeon can track that and let you know if you leave spec. It can also work as a pseudo process control indicator, right? You could set it up to an inline pH meter and have it alert you when something goes out of spec. You can set it up to one of their videos on their site of their demo pieces is just a little camshaft rotating around and pressing a button, and it can count how many presses it has and send that to you. So you could set up a iPad over top of your in your production room, and every hour you could send a message to a WhatsApp account on that iPad that says, you guys did this many units this hour. That's fantastic. Or, we need to reevaluate because we did, 25% less than normal. It could be used for KPIs, basically. What it can't do right now is take that information and like put it into a spreadsheet like Google Sheets or any other database. You could do that manually, but it can't do that automatically. I'm trying to talk them into getting that capability. I think that'd be really interesting. But that's something to keep an eye on. This service is something to keep an eye on because it's really, really cheap. It can be really, really powerful. So if you're interested in that, please do let me know. I'm personally interested in that. So let's talk a bit about, we're getting short on time here, so let's move on a little bit. Analysis. Also, what is the goal, right? In this instance, we're trying to learn something in order to have better base assumptions to make better decisions, right? Manual versus automatic, right? We talked a little bit how AI ML algorithms can actually automate analysis of data, but in this instance, we're talking more about automating presentation of data. So services like NextPlus or Tulip will actually, those dashboards, you can create them, but they'll be auto-populated with information as you generate them. So if you say, oh, I want a process control chart of temperature readings that my operator put in, it'll auto-populate that control chart over time, right? You don't have to make it like you would in Google Sheets. Whereas a manual, like I said, you have to actually create that chart. You could program it to automatically update as you add data in. Once again, the power of that platform, but maybe not. So think about how much data you're collecting, and if it's valuable to have the presentation, the visualization of the data, automated or manual. We talked a bit about this earlier, real-time data analysis and presentation versus more historical trends. KPIs are fantastic. I don't know if a representative from Wine & Chocolates and Pick was still here, but I got a permission from her to talk about this today. They just integrated a brand new KPI system all in Google Sheets, like in the last few months, which is awesome, not just because I love Google Sheets, but because in this instance, I mean, they were looking at, some process equipment to increase capacity, anywhere from like high 5-figure to low 6-figure investment. And that's gone now. That's no longer necessary because of the efficiency gains they got from KPI integration, from tracking important real-time information about their process in Google Sheets so everyone could see it for free. That's awesome. That's a really awesome success story of the value of this kind of thing. So KPIs are really valuable. I wouldn't say you need 1 million of them, maybe 2 or 3. I can't tell you what they are for your specific setup, but think about at the end of the month what numbers you're worried about not being high enough. See if you can monitor those in real time. I think you'll be a lot more impressed. And then obviously there's another way to track this is through trends, right? Through a bar graph of the past 12 months in terms of output, you know, the pie chart of the last year in terms of downtime, where, you know, 30% downtime, a lot, 5% downtime. Depending on what you're tracking, real time or historical trends will be better. Also, there's a certain aspect of this to ease of use. It might be tougher to set up your own automated KPI system. Like I said, Linus just did it, but it probably takes a lot of time and energy. Maybe it's easier to just track it, you know, month to month or week to week important information if it's not really crucial that it's in your face all day, every day. And then the last thing is just how do you want to look at it? I have built dashboards for people that are tabular, that are just a bunch of numbers. I have built dashboards for people that are all visual. It kind of depends on the information. For things like, I think for things like production rates or other real-time indicators, tabular is better. And then for longer term trends, that may be where I look at something like a graphical visualization. I don't love process control charts. That's just me. I'd rather see numbers, but to each their own, right? And then data analysis tools. This isn't very long. Talking about Google Sheets again, you just heard an awesome success story from Linus about the power of that. My team just built an entire production capacity model in Google Sheets. It's like 40 tabs, but it's possible. So the power of that system of spreadsheet software generally is huge, and it's not to be overlooked necessarily, right? And if you don't know where to begin with that, that's a situation where you can, of course, call me. You saw when we were going through some of these tools, Next Plus tool at Mingo, they have this capability built in. Like I said, this isn't really the interesting part because once you have numbers, doing things with them is easier and more established. It's getting the numbers is really important. So if you do invest in any of these tools we talked about, that's going to give you the ability to pull out the insights you want to get if you go that tool route. And then like the last thing before we talk about some more Q&A is some of my tips on doing this after doing this half a dozen times. And after I read over these again this morning, there's really only two. It looks like there's four, but there's really two. Do things that are easy, right? Go after the low-hanging fruit. Find the easiest area to capitalize and see a return, because that's going to get buy-in. If you're the internal champion for something like this, it might be tough. It might be tough to convince management if you are management, if you are the decision maker. It might be tough to convince them. It's really going to be tough initially to convince your operators, because this is kind of more work for them up front. But if you can take a use case where the additional work is minimal and the return in making their lives better is substantial, then you can get buy-in to go do the harder things down the road. That's like, so go after low-hanging fruit and early results for buy-in. The other thing I want to talk about is aim small, miss small, right? If you're trying to look at your entire production setup tomorrow, after you just learned about the benefit of measuring process data today, you're gonna be really wrong, and all the information you're gathering is gonna be useless, or worse, you're gonna make decisions based off of bad data. It's better to focus in on specific use cases, start with one, and become really hyper familiar with just that one area and just that one measurement or one or two measurements, and find something important there. Because then if you're a little inaccurate, 5 or 7 or 10% off, it's not as impactful in the rest of your process. So those are some things I have and some tips I have from doing this that I would recommend if you actually want to take this and go run with it. And of course, there's another scenario where if you have specific questions, please do call me. I think that's the end of the deck. I had a question slide. I didn't think I did. I'm gonna stop sharing just so I can see the Q&A because I can't see it right now. Imagine there's a question slide on screen. So I know we had one earlier. Anybody else have any questions or anything we discussed today? Would be happy to answer anything you guys have. I'm going to take that as a sign that I was incredibly thorough and you all already had your questions answered. So with that, that's all I have today for you folks. Integrating these can be tough. like I said, if you're going with any of the more manual approaches that are a little lower initial investment, Civ has experience doing this. So if you want us to come in and help you, please call me. If you want me to give you more tips and that's it, please call me. Whatever it is you need from us to make this happen, we want to support. If you're interested in talking to any of the resources I mentioned today, please let me know too. I have contacts with everyone over there, so we can make those conversations happen a lot quicker. Some of them are very interested in branching out more into food and bev, and so if you go through me, there might be some benefits in terms of lowering cost or more service support from them. So please let me know if you want to go through and talk to any of those service providers. And folks, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you learned something. We have a question. It should be like a buzzer or something. Where will this webcast be available? That is an excellent question. I believe our marketing manager, Todd, can let you know where. I am being informed. Earpiece. You folks will be sent a recording after this. This whole thing has been recorded. You will be sent that information. Let me resolve that. Fantastic. Awesome. What was I in the middle of? Oh yes, please call me if you want to pursue this. Hopefully you learn something. I will hop on here if you have any questions, but if you are going to bounce off, have a wonderful Thursday. Hope to see you all at our, we have some events coming up this year. Be on the lookout for those. They'll happen in person. Our annual Ohio Food Industry Summit is coming up. You'll see information about that shortly. So be on the lookout. Join us at our in-person events. Talk to me about more of these. We will have some, talk to me about these at those events, at least if we don't have any of these partners at them, which we might. So. All right, excellent, folks. So it seems like everyone's dropping off. I'll be signing off here from me and everyone else at SIF. Thank you so much for coming. Have a fantastic Thursday, folks.